Welcome to Hell of a Picture. My name is Andrew Bartlett, and this is a weekly podcast about movies and what makes them unforgettable. And if they're a hell of a picture, which is our distinction for a movie that does a little bit something more than just is a great film. It's a hell of a picture. I'm sitting with Mr. David Hollingsworth. Oh my gosh, we can touch. We're not over the internet. How are you today, sir?
I'm great. It's so nice to have human contact.
Oh man,
it's a joy.
This is the best. This is our second time recording in person. We did The Rock together.
Yes, we did.
A few weeks ago. Usually we do this over the internet, but David's back home for a little visit, and we're doing a in-person recording. And what a movie we chose to do in person. Movies. This is a sort of a special episode of Hell of a Picture where we have a movie right now, or movies that are sort of in the social zeitgeist right now. Very popular. Mm-hmm. It's the Dune series. Dune Part I, Dune Part II. We're doing both of them. And we're going to do them as one, or we're going to do them as two. We don't really know.
There may be some contention over that.
Yeah. We both sort of feel like they are great films to kind of combine into one episode. One discussion that we're going to split into two episodes. There's a lot to talk about with these movies, and we're going to get into a lot of it. And these are dense, long movies and entertaining movies, blockbuster movies.
Absolutely. That
both have a runtime of close to 3 hours. So, we felt like this is a good opportunity for, how's that mic?
I'm drifting.
You're drifting.
Got a little Tokyo drift going on here.
Yeah, these mics, we're not used to these mics because...
Typically I'm at, a computer desk, and now I'm propped up on a bar stool.
Oh, man, you're in... That is spinning. All right.
There we go. Okay.
I think we're good, yeah.
I think we're okay.
So we figured that this is just a great opportunity to try something a little different, where we're going to talk a lot about the movie, give some background. This is a series of movies that are based on some very popular sci-fi novels.
Absolutely.
And we're going to, give a little background, give a little thoughts on Denis Villeneuve and how he sort of tackled these films. And then, we'll start getting into a deep dive in part two, ironically, of part two of this sort of like little two-parter. And we won't let you know yet if we're going to call this a hell of a picture, or if both of them are hell of a pictures, or one's a hell of a picture and one's not a hell of a picture. You'll have to hold on and wait till the second part of this, and we'll let you all know.
Yeah. No, I think it's good to save that kind of conclusion for the conclusion. So
conclusion for the conclusion.
Yeah, seems appropriate. As the book was split into two movies, so shall we split the conversation into two episodes. It's all very meta.
Well said. This is a really a real big undertaking. Not just for us.
Mostly for us, actually. What Villeneuve did was a paltry thing compared to what we're doing here today.
Yeah, so this movie, the first one came out in, what year, 2021?
The first, Dune Part I was released in 2021.
Did you see these in theaters?
I did. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
So
COVID be damned, I saw it in theaters, yeah.
Oh, yeah, this was during the height.
It was, but they did, there was... I don't know if there was a sort of temporary lift. It might have been in one of those moments where we had sort of a relaxing of protocols,
right.
and they probably mostly for Dune. I think the theater, the production company may have pulled some strings there with the WHO. But in any event, we did see this in theaters, and so glad I did. It is a theater movie, undoubtedly. And we saw the second as well in theaters.
Wow.
And man, oh man, that's the way to go.
Yeah.
Cinemas. Go to the cinemas.
Go to the cinemas.
Go to the cinemas.
Come on, support the medium.
Yeah.
Come on, this is ridiculous.
Dune needs your help.
Dune needs your help. Dune needs another $1 billion.
That's right.
Before we dive in and Dave gets to the rundown, we just want to say, be sure that if you're listening this long, that you like and subscribe and do all those good stuffs on our socials. Hell of a Picture podcast on most socials. We want to keep growing this audience, and we do it one like and one subscribe and one share at a time. So, be at that. I hate, we always have to do those, but
Please like us. We crave validation.
Yeah.
That's basically what this is. We're
we're just validating each other. That's
that's right.
that's all we do. All right. So to get us into this little two-parter, we're going to start as we do every week with the rundown.
The rundown. So the year is 10191. And humanity has spread across the stars, and civilization operates in a form of imperial feudalism. Colonized worlds are run by great houses, and these houses pay homage to the Emperor Shaddam IV. In this future, the most precious commodity in the universe is spice, also known as mélange. Now, spice has myriad applications and properties. It extends life and just straight up gets you high. But its most important quality is that it grants certain users the ability to presage the future, and it is this property that makes it indispensable for space travel. Without precognition, the Space Guild navigators would not be able to safely chart routes across the galaxy, and that would effectively cripple the Empire. Now, as it happens, spice can only be found on one planet in the known universe, Arrakis, aka Dune. For decades, House Harkonnen has ruled Dune with its trademark brutality and ignorance, ensuring that spice supply continues to flow and growing massively wealthy in the process. But within the Landsraad, that is the name for the coalition of great houses, the rival to the Harkonnens, House Atreides, is making the Emperor uneasy. He believes that Duke Leto Atreides is a threat to his rule, and he, along with the mystic order of the Bene Gesserit, whose loyalty really may be only to themselves and their goals, conspire with House Harkonnen to eliminate House Atreides. The Emperor sends an imperial edict naming House Atreides the new governors of Dune in what would seem a great prize. House Atreides is honor-bound to accept, despite their concerns that this gift may be poisoned, and they take governorship of Dune. But not long after arriving on Dune, the trap is sprung, and the Harkonnens, aided by the Emperor's own elite forces, launch a surprise attack, decimating the Atreides. My God. Duke Leto is taken hostage and eventually dies in a pretty awesome murder-suicide attempt, while his wife Jessica and son Paul are sent into the desert to be killed by Storm, Worm, or Fremen, take your pick. Jessica, a Bene Gesserit herself, and Paul make contact with the Fremen, the indigenous human population of Dune, and they are eventually accepted into the Sietch, the Fremen word for tribe. Thanks to centuries of Bene Gesserit cultural manipulation, a prophecy exists among the Fremen that an off-world Messiah will arrive to deliver their people. And there are those among the Fremen that believe that Messiah, the Lisan al-Gaib, is Paul. After much contention, which I won't go into because this rundown is running hella long, Paul is confirmed in his messianic birthrights and leads the Fremen in a bloody rebellion that liberates Dune, grants Paul his revenge against the Harkonnens, and results in a galactic jihad that burns holy hellfire across the galaxy.
Well said.
Dune 1, Part 1 was released in 2021, with the continuation Dune Part II being released in 2024. Both were directed by our boy Denis Villeneuve and star, again, our boy, Timothée Chalamet, who, I mean, at this point, if we have a Hall of Fame of Hell of the Picture,
man.
Chalamet's got to be on there. Like, I mean, he's the most recurring character.
Chalamet.
It's incredible. So he plays Paul Muad'Dib Usil Atreides. Rebecca Ferguson plays his mother, the Lady Jessica. Zendaya plays Chani. Stellan Skarsgård as Baron Vladimir Harkonnen. And I have to ask, has there ever been a non-evil Vladimir? I mean, certainly, currently.
Currently,
You're not getting many babies named Vladimir outside Russia.
Certainly are not.
Javier Bardem as Stilgar. Oscar Isaac as Duke Leto Atreides. Josh Brolin as Gurney Halleck. Jason Momoa as Duncan Idaho. Dave Bautista as Robin Harkonnen. Austin Butler as Fade Routha Harkonnen, Florence Pugh as Princess Irulan, Leia Seydoux as Lady Margot, and Christopher Walken as the Emperor. I could have gone on. That is a cast. Holy smokes. Dune Part 1 cost about $165 million, and it took in about $408. Dune Part 2 cost $190 million and brought in approximately $712 million. Both films were well received by critics and fans, though the consensus seems to be that Part 2 was preferred by both groups. Part 1 was nominated for 10 Oscars: Best Picture, Best Visual Effects, Best Score, Best Cinematography, Best Editing, Best Production Design, Best Sound, Best Costume Design, Best Makeup, Best Hairstyling, and Best Adapted Screenplay. It won 6 out of 10,
Wow.
those being score, sound, cinematography, production design, editing, and visual effects. Dune 2 has yet to receive its laurels, but we can only assume that it's going to be showered in them when the requisite award season arrives.
Absolutely.
Dune Parts 1 and 2 were, of course, based on the novel Dune by Frank Herbert, which was was first published in 1965 and was the first of 6 Dune books that Herbert wrote, including Dune Messiah, Children of Dune, God Emperor of Dune, Heretics of Dune, and finally Chapter House Dune. But the Dune universe did not end there. After the death of Frank, Brian, his son, much like Isildur, took up his father's sword and went on to write a metric crapload of Dune stories. Dune, the original, and probably the series, remain the greatest selling sci-fi books ever written. You can find its fingerprints on just about everything that came afterwards, from Star Wars to Star Trek and on down the line. And that, at long last, is your rundown.
Wow.
Whew!
Applause on that rundown, David.
Thank you.
Man, that was a hefty rundown.
That was the beast, yeah.
That was without a doubt our longest rundown, and very detailed.
Yeah, I do apologize. I just couldn't, when I was writing that, I couldn't help myself. I kept thinking like, okay, no, I can cut this. I'm like, no, I can't. Like,
No.
you gotta mention that. And
Got to get a lot of stuff in.
you do. That was a problem for me, and I saw a problem that we'll discuss as well with making this movie, adapting it from a source material, what to prune, what to keep, and what to omit. It is a deeply complicated question.
Yeah, it is, and that films like this, adaptations, are sort of that's sort of the one of the number one things that they struggle with, and we've talked about that before. We talked about it with Blade Runner. We didn't really talk about it with Jurassic Park, although that is, but like Little Women, we talked about it.
We did. We absolutely did.
So we're slowly ending up doing a lot of film adaptations, which is interesting.
It is.
Now, Dune was originally adapted in the 1980s by a renowned filmmaker, David Lynch, but this is certainly not one of his more, accomplished pieces.
Yeah. Safe to say.
I haven't seen. Have you seen this one?
The 84
Yeah.
Lynch, I have actually a number of times, and I watch it every now and then.
So it's like a good return.
Well, it's the kind of thing I come back to. It's almost like the Star Wars prequels. Like I go back to see, like, is it as I remember it? And like, truth be told, I don't think in a lot of ways it's as bad as a lot of people will tell you it is.
Okay.
It's still not great. It gets very muddied. They do include some stuff from the second book a little. Like they get crossed over themselves. It gets a little weird in classic Lynch fashion, but it sort of feels like there were other people with their hands on this, and David Lynch didn't get the kind of control that he should have.
Interesting.
And I think he suffered from what this movie very successfully avoided, which was over-inclusion and maybe too much of a commitment to the source material.
Okay.
So we'll talk about at one point, when we'll get into it, what this film omitted, what it kept in.
Yes.
Whether or not that was the right choice. And we can sort of do a compare and contrast maybe a little bit with Lynch's Dune. But he maybe suffered from what Villeneuve more nimbly avoided. We'll
Okay.
say. Maybe. It's debatable.
Yeah, I haven't seen it. I did see some sort of like clips from it here and there, and it's very 80s. Let's just put it that way.
It is that.
It feels a bit. The effects are kind of cheesy at times and a bit.
But we can live with that. We've both seen that before, and we're comfortable with that.
Whereas something like this, the technology has really gotten to a point where things feel so authentic and real, and just filmmaking in general has gotten, 100 years now of practice and trying to getting these stories right, and we're at the point now when you're watching this and it's so believable, right?
Yeah,
everything feels so authentic. I feel like that doesn't lend itself so much to earlier filmmaking styles. But I don't know. You get like that. That's like with everything, right? Like you see these things. Remember video games back in the day? You look at like a sports game now, and you're like,
man.
look at like the basketball players. Like it's like this looks so real. And then you're like, remember being like in, when NHL 94 came out, and you're like,
classic.
You're like, oh my God, like games cannot get any more real than what they are now. And I guess you're just going to keep advancing technologies. But anyway, I digress. Frank.
No, let's keep talking about NHL 94. That's what the people want to hear.
Yeah. Circle around the back of the net, get the goalie locked in. And
wasn't that where you had the thing? If you come from like exactly. Yeah. There was that little cheat in there that, Oh man. Game hacks.
Game
Classic.
hacks. They're great.
So good.
But Frank Herbert, let's get into, so this is the first case of us doing a movie, in this case, movies, where you've read the source material.
Correct.
I have not. So can you fill us in a little bit on sort of Frank Herbert and his, I guess, novels, just the series in general?
Yeah, it's been a while since I read them, quite a while, in fact. But I've picked up Dune Messiah in the past couple of days to just for the hell of it. And man, it's still so good, That, for context, is the sequel to what we are discussing here today. So if there is to be a third Dune, it will pick up where Dune Messiah, the book begins. But we do need to talk about Frank Herbert because, like you said, we've done a number of novel adaptations, but I haven't yet been compelled to address the source material, probably because I hadn't read any of the source materials.
Right.
But this definitely feels different than the other adaptations we've talked about. It's hallowed in a way that I don't think Jurassic Park is as a book, that Jaws was as a book. Those are bestsellers, but I don't think there's a rich fan culture surrounding them. And
no, I don't think so.
And, we talked about Philip K. Dick with Ridley Scott's, interpretation of his work. And, Ridley Scott, he kind of took an axe to Philip K. Dick. It's interesting. And that's not a condemnation of Ridley Scott by any means, because we both agreed, I think, that what he did with Blade Runner was fantastic. And it was.
And Dick loved it. And
did he? Okay, that's cool.
Like he saw. I think he must have saw the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like maybe he died before it got released and he saw like rushes or something.
Right.
Maybe
got an advanced screening of the 4-hour cut that Ridley wanted.
But he's I think been quoted as saying like when he first saw cuts of it, he was absolutely blown away.
Nice.
And he was like, how did you do that? Or like how, like just couldn't wrap his head around seeing his words on screen and just how authentic it felt. And so like as much as Ridley Scott sort of changed that, changed a lot of the elements of the book. I don't think it was Dick. Dick wasn't a case of him changing it and then being pissed off about it, I guess.
I love that he can be objective in that way because we talked about this as well, how it's cool to see a different interpretation of works. You have the original. Let the original be the original. Let the film be the film and enjoy them both for what they are. And I like that because it could be very easy to be sensitive about that as a creator, to have your work altered. But this feels more like an homage to the source material than what Blade Runner felt like. Yes, there was respect, there was reverence for it, but he changed a lot. This feels like Villeneuve made every effort to preserve what he was drawing on, changing what he had to, but being as delicate as he could when he did that.
Yeah, the books, there's always this tough thing with the adaptations of books, right? And you think about books that have such huge followings and are so like massive in scope, and I think about Tolkien's like The Lord of the Rings,
of course,
The Hobbit, right? And when Peter Jackson first started to, I'm gonna adapt Fellowship and Two Towers and Return of the King, it's almost like people are waiting for him to fuck it up.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like you can't. It's like this is too big. This is too massive. And the thing with like adaptations, and we kind of touched on this with Blade Runner, and I think it was an interview from Denis Villeneuve where he talks and he says, like there's scenes, there's moments that you can sort of depict something that takes a chapter to get across, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So it's like you get this whole chapter of building backstory and building all this, and it's like sometimes you need to be able to do that in one shot,
Right.
1 5-second shot, because you just don't have the time to kind of get into all the minutia of descriptions that books have.
Unless you want to do an internal dialogue, like a monologue of characters, which we agree can be clumsy and,
Wow,
Harrison Ford.
certainly in Blade Runner.
Yeah, that's right.
But yeah, for Dune, the thing that I found very interesting with respect to the films is, and we'll get into this a bit later in more detail, but just the ability for Villeneuve to let things breathe, and we've seen that in Blade Runner 2049. We saw it in Enemy, what we talked about last week. And there's this idea that it's like he lets things breathe and lets you really take it in and absorb it and
Right.
and sort of get a sense of what is happening. So at times I think this film, a lot, specifically part one, you maybe on first viewing you might think it maybe breathes a little too much, like allows for you to really absorb these moments and absorb what's happening and these long drawn out panning shots and these, but that really is what is driving the character based story of the film.
Yes.
So that's something that he does very well, Denis Villeneuve, and allowing moments to breathe and let your audience take it in is a very smart tactic when adapting a book.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we talked about it a lot in 2049, our discussion on Blade Runner 2049, how there are these ponderous long shots. And a lot of people may say, like, do you need this? Are you kidding? And I think we both loved it.
Yeah.
And it does fill that role of narrative description. What you get in a book, and why a book is always more detailed, and most people, will say they prefer the book to the movie. It's because of what an author provides in description and context and the richness of what they can create with their words. And you have chapters and chapters to do this. And Villeneuve, filmmakers like him, they have shots. They only have shots. And so exactly as you said, he has these moments where these extended shots that allows the film to breathe, allows you to take it in, and then you can fill in that narration that you are missing. Right. You get to make the descriptions, and you let the pictures on the screen translate into your mind, and that does sort of take up the place of what would be narration in a book, and I think that's super cool. Just getting back to Herbert, just very briefly, I thought this was interesting, and very unorthodox for the era. Okay. So he started writing this book in the late 50s, and what allowed him to do that was his wife was a full-time, she worked as an advertising writer, and she was the breadwinner for the family. And that was not common back then at all, by any means. And even though the Dune world is still decidedly patriarchal, I think you do, especially compared to contemporary works of the time, and even works that followed it. Sci-fi and fantasy tend to be very male-driven. You do not get a lot of good female representation. Lord of the Rings, there's not great female representation in that. Now, that's decades earlier, but it's something the genre struggles with and continues to struggle with, I would say. But you do get a lot of consequential, powerful, and interesting female characters in this book, and I've got to think some of that was based around his experience of having a wife who was independent, who worked and was a writer herself. They actually met in a writing course, a creative writing course, and they were both the only people in the class to have had published works prior to writing the course. So I think there is a reverence for women in these books, and I thought that was kind of cool to see where it came from in his background. Yeah,
I mean, the content of these movies, I mean, women are such a important part of it. You could even make the argument that the most powerful, you're talking about a Messiah character in Paul, and the Baron, who's this godlike figure, and the Emperor who kind of rules oversees it all. You could kind of make the argument that the Reverend Mother or the Bene Gesserit are the most powerful
Absolutely.
Characters in the whole movie.
Yep.
You know, and I think that's interesting. And like, it's very, and it's subtle, right? It's like, it's not, I'm the queen and I'm this. It's like that moment in the very end of the film. I love when she says, they sort of telepathically, the Reverend Mother says, Paul's mother says, I guess the other Reverend Mother or the other higher up Bene Gesserit says like, oh, looks like you chose the wrong side. And then she says something along the lines of, you know, oh, silly girl, or like, you know, there are no sides or whatever, right? Like they're overseeing it all.
Yeah.
They're the power.
Absolutely. And one of the refrains in the book actually is this idea of plans within plans, or feints within feints, thoughts within thoughts, and moves within moves.
Yeah.
And so the layers of machinations that the Bene Gesserit have are just wildly deep. And yeah, it's not about sort of taking it's there's a larger plan in place than just who's the emperor. There's much more to it than that. And continuing just one more point on Herbert and how that relates to what comes across on page and on screen. I don't know why I thought this, but I didn't imagine him as a political conservative, but he is. He was, excuse me. And granted, that meant something different back then than it does today, but he was a fairly staunch Republican. He wrote speeches for a few Republican candidates, but he had a very deep mistrust of governments and particularly charismatic leaders. Yeah, that sounds pretty significant.
Yeah.
What I found really interesting, his distaste for charismatic leaders led him to despise JFK.
Oh,
Hated Kennedy.
a boy.
No time for it. Yeah,
JFK.
Yeah, exactly. Nice hair be damned, and glib charm, you know, whatever. But what he thought was Kennedy's charisma and people's sort of penchant to follow people with charisma made him very dangerous and potentially like a political demigod. Now, as an extension of that, he thought Nixon was good for the country.
Ooh.
Yeah, I know. Because, you know, the outing of Nixon as a treacherous weasel taught the country a valuable lesson. And that lesson was, do not trust your government and your leaders. And that became really central to Dune. And sort of to quote an interview that he gave on the subject of that, said, Dune was aimed at this whole idea of the infallible leader, because my view of history says that mistakes made by a leader or made in a leader's name are amplified by the numbers who follow without question. Or to quote a section from the final Dune novel, Chapter House Dune, all governments suffer a recurring problem. Power attracts pathological personalities. It is not that power corrupts, but that it is magnetic to the corruptible. Such people have a tendency to become drunk on violence, a condition to which they are quickly addicted. And dope lines, and I think pretty significant to the work that we'll be discussing here today.
Oh man, Dune. They have, you know, I want to say, people being drunk with power. I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on a lot of different characters in this film when it comes to that sort of idea of power and people's desire for power. And yeah, it seems pretty, you know, for something that was written in the 60s, it certainly seems pretty prevalent today.
I guess the thing there is that these ideas are, it's sort of like what we talked about in Enemy. It's a recurrence. It's a pattern. You know, he mentions that very specifically in Enemy, that dictatorships, this keeps happening and we keep making the same mistakes. Yeah. I think Herbert was very much in tune with that.
So a book like this, you know, Dune, it's very dense. I would assume it's long.
Not as long as you might think. It is dense, but it's not like one of these giant tomes like that friggin' big. It's probably in the 400-page range, I guess, thereabouts. But what is in there is dense, to be sure.
And then, so adapting that is just such a massive, massive undertaking.
Yeah.
And like notoriously, they don't. It's hard for people to adapt stories like this because, like as we are mentioning, there is such a strong affinity for the novel, affinity for the literary work that you know, people get upset about what things sort of are left out. And I can't really speak to that. Do you know the things that were? I mean, we can get into it a bit later too, but like the ideas or main themes or just story arcs that were sort of left out of the book versus the films.
Yeah, I mean, of course, there were a few things, and we talked about this before, that you are going to have to omit things. It just
Yes.
cannot translate over perfectly. It's not going to survive a change in medium intact. It
Right.
cannot be done. But yeah, there are some things I think that hardcore fans would probably be up in arms over a little bit, either left out or left unexplained. Debatable, a reasonable conversation to be had over whether they're right or wrong. I think in most cases they're probably being a bit unreasonable. But one of the things that we should be call attention to. So you might have noticed, or not, sort of you're engaged in the film. You might not pick up on this, but there aren't really any computers in this movie.
Oh, yeah.
There's advanced technology, obviously, but there's nothing resembling AI or computing systems. And
Okay.
the reason for that, and this is critical to a number of other important things, is that a long time ago in the Dune saga, there was an event called the Butlerian Jihad. And this was essentially a crusade that people went on to rid humanity of thinking machines. They didn't like the dependence on them. They thought there was a risk to humanity itself, yada, yada, yada. So they wiped them out. There were no more computational computer devices. And so as a result, humans had to fill that role. So what you got was these orders that came about that raised people from birth and trained them to be human machines, human computers, basically.
Oh, aren't those characters are in the first one?
You do see it, yeah. You do see it. It's the Stephen McKinley character.
Yeah.
He was in Lady Bird. He's the the priest and the theater instructor.
He's great.
He's so good, man. He's so good. So he plays Thufir. Oh, I gotta get his name. Yeah, Thufir Hawat. And he is a mentat. That is, they don't give the name, they don't give the background, but he is there. And you do see him as this advisor to the Duke. And there's this one point where the Duke asks him a question, and he closes, he sort of his eyes roll back in his head, and then he runs this like massively complex computation in like seconds. And so,
cool.
You don't really need an explanation of how or why he does that, but there is kind of a cascading effect to that because. So the Bene Gesserit, they do get into how they are breeding the houses, right? They are selectively mating people across the houses, and they want to bring about the Kwisatz Haderach, this Messiah that they believe, which Paul potentially is.
Which is why they do a bunch of different. They have a bunch of different.
Correct.
Like suitors, they say.
Correct. Yeah. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So. The reason why that's important is that the Kwisatz Haderach is essentially the ultimate form of this human computer. So it will have the abilities of the Mentat as well as the abilities of the Bene Gesserit, so the power of the voice, which Jessica teaches Paul.
Yes.
And then he will also have the wide-reaching prescience of the Spacing Guild. The Spacing Guild is who charts and navigates through space. And they are people, they do that through the use of spice. So they are able to see so far into the future and so far through space-time that they can safely navigate through space, because otherwise you can't do it. You need to be able to predict how, where to go and how to chart the paths. And so that's the whole reason that the Bene Gesserit are breeding and doing what they're doing. And there's also this whole thing that it has to be, they wanted Jessica to have a daughter, because you cannot, a male Bene Gesserit is a terrible thing until they reach this ultimate point of this Kwisatz Haderach. So yeah, there's a lot in there, and you can see why they kind of left it out, because to explain all that would be just, it could bog down the movie. But we could go on with this, but just in short, the things that they leave out. So Jessica has an unborn daughter in the second movie. Okay. That daughter is born in the books. Okay. Fully alive. Paul and Chani actually have a son in the book who also dies. In the sort of in like the old in the scene where the Harkonnens kind of attack the Siege when they're down in the south. Right. The whole time they spend in the desert is like years. It's not like the months that it kind of seems like. It's a long time. Yes. Yeah, anyway, yada, yada, yada. So deep fans of the books will probably rail against this, but I don't think you can make this movie properly without mercilessly pruning away as they did. And I think they did just about as good a job as you could ask. Yeah, the Stephen McKinley character in the first film is not in the second film. Like, I thought that was I sort of assumed he was a robot. Right. Yeah. And it's like, I'm just like, okay, he's just like, they have robots or like AI systems that essentially
are the same as, you know, replicants in Blade Runner.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, these are what these, you know, and they sort of serve. But hearing that, it was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess the Baron has one too, right? Are they like sort of noted by their...
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So
like
they're kind of like the Bene Gesserit in that they are an order that serves. It's almost like the Masters or the Maesters, however you want to pronounce it,
Right.
in Game of Thrones. They will get sort of dispatched to a lord, and they serve at their pleasure. They have no real loyalty.
Right.
Like, you know, they are not beholden to anyone but the lord they serve, or at least ostensibly. Now, obviously, the Bene Gesserit have plans and machinations, and as the Mentats may well have the same, you know.
Right.
So, but the idea is, yes, that they are sort of dispatched to serve each of the great houses, and yeah, you interpreted that correctly.
The great thing about, you know, you leaving these things out, like you said, for people that are huge fans of the books, it could feel like, oh, I really wanted that, or I'm missing this, or it's like there's no kid, or it's like I want to see the sister, and it's like when you start breaking down what the film is, and what the goal for Denis Villeneuve is to try to get across. First of all, he's such a good filmmaker. He's such a great filmmaker at character-driven pieces. So he really wants to build, but these character-driven pieces in these like huge worlds, like we saw it with 2049, see it in Arrival, and even a movie like Sicario, which is like, it's not a huge massive world, but it's like it's two nations and you're crossing the borders, and there's these interesting characters, these big figures, but they're always these character driven pieces.
Yes.
Because when you break down what the movie is about, you know, it's really there are good guys, there are bad guys, but the best films, in my opinion, and the most compelling characters are ones that are sort of in a gray area, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like in this, you need good guys and bad guys in this film. Like, you know, you need somebody like the Baron. It's just like you need
a Vladimir.
Yeah, you need a Vladimir. You need what was it, Rhea Fede?
Rhea. I can't remember how to pronounce it, but
it's Austin Butler,
correct,
like the psychopath in the
the wonderful cannibalistic. He's so good.
But like, you know, when you're thinking about your main characters, your Shandis, your Pauls, or then I guess you have like the complete good person, which would be Duke Atreides.
Only good because he dies before he has a chance to. Yeah,
exactly.
It's the Batman theory, right? You die the hero, you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. Right?
Exactly. And then, you know, but I guess when you break it down and you're thinking about Paul, it's like I have so many thoughts and ideas about, you know, what he actually thinks, how he is presented. But what's brilliant about Denis Villeneuve is that he leaves that in the audience's choice. Like he's not saying to you he is this person.
Yes. Because
when we talk about it later, we can talk about, or next week in the next episode, we'll talk about, you know, is he the Messiah? Is he not the Messiah? Is he good? Is he bad? Is he in it for himself? Is he actually in it for love? Is he in it for Shanti? Is he in it for, you know, is it Shanti or John?
Chani.
Chani.
Yeah.
Chani.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Shanti, Chani.
Shantytown.
Anyway, yes, but like, I'm these compelling characters is what drives the film, and the minute details when it comes to this, like, you know, various plot points, sometimes you can lose. Detail in the world building. That's where he excels.
Yes, absolutely. And we talked about it with 2049 that rather than inclusion of artifacts or characters or events or places from the original, capturing the spirit of the original was the most important thing, and that's why it worked. And again, that's what happens here. Like you said very astutely, he captures the characters, the qualities, and the themes and ideas.
Yep.
And that's really what matters to this. Like, yes, there are nice little details, and like a lot of this stuff that was left out is interesting. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
You also need pages upon pages and books upon books to fully capture it and understand it. You're not going to be able to do that in a movie. No. If you did, it would be an absolute mess. And yeah, you're 100% correct. You capture what's important through the characters, and you make it character-driven and idea-driven, and he did that really masterfully.
Yeah, but you know, tell me about his stylistic choices, because that's what I like. You know, when you're talking about like the characters and stuff, and like those are really the important parts of driving a strong story. But like you have to create a world that is been created and that has, you know, is just a massive undertaking. So like he is known for his attention to detail and his use of like, you know, physical sets. Like, yes, there's lots of CGI in this film, because you just have to have it for a lot of things, but he's building these huge sets. I think they said like just like tons of sound stages, building these huge, like the, you know, tunnels, like the Fremen tunnels and all this stuff on Arrakis. You know, building these huge worlds, building these ships, like they, you know, the ships that they were building, they physically, like they existed, like
the ornithopters, like those sort of dragonfly, like
the CGI was the flapping of the wings, but they had built the thing and they're like lifting it up on these, and there's
a shot where you can see that is actually that wing is moving, like it's got a close up of like where it's being actuated, and you're like, oh no, that's real. Like,
it's like they had one wing, but then the multiple wings were like different. But yeah, there's stylistic choices that he makes that give it this authentic feel.
Yeah, and this is the third and fourth Villeneuve films that we've talked about now, and definitely starting to see stylistic leanings. And I want to give a thanks to my mom who listens. So hello, Mom. Because we were watching part one together a while back, and the scene where Duke Leto is drugged and he's brought before the Baron Harkonnen, he's there draped over that chair, you know, he's naked, he's so vulnerable. Yeah, exactly. And as soon as Mom saw that image, she just said, oh, that's a Caravaggio. And if you're like me, I didn't know what she meant initially, but what she's referring to is Michelangelo Caravaggio, who was an artist in the Baroque period, somewhere in the 1600s he was active. And he does a lot of work, a lot of paintings representing biblical scenes, particularly biblical scenes of like great anguish.
Oh, like the scene itself.
Yeah, the image. So the image where he is like that, and sort of you get this shot. Yeah. And so like one of the big identifying qualities of Baroque work, I won't go into all of it right now, but two really important things for this is dramatic use of light and shadow. That is very important to Baroque work. And then images of death and ecstasy. So you get contrast. You have death and you have ecstasy. You have light and you have dark. And man, is that not something that we have seen a lot from Villeneuve? Like you think about 2049, and you pointed it out in the episode. There's a couple of scenes where you get this light like through rippling water, and it casts this like you know this thing on the wall, and then you get shadow, and you get people who are in and out of shadow, and there's that great moment with Wallace and Deckard, and I'm thinking Denis Villeneuve really loves him some Baroque period art, because boy does he ever. The dramatic use of light and dark in particular seems something that he is very good at.
I mean, that scene in itself is so great, and the Baron is sort of like eating and like gorging on
He's
the food.
He's the perfect villain. He's so gross.
And he's just like, he's just like, oh, great food, cousin. He says.
Yeah, that's right.
Like the Duke is literally dying, like trying to, and it's that's a great great contrast. But it's like getting inspiration and ideas from things that just aren't just movies, but are like, you know, pieces of art, of music, of just like, you know, other cultures of just sort of everything is what makes it very interesting. There's the idea that you have to make, you know, this movie takes place in the future in, you know, 10,000 AD, whatever.
Yeah.
And, you know, you have to make this futuristic world, but you have to make it look ancient, right?
Yeah, I love that.
And it's like there's all this attention to detail. There's you see it a lot in the Fremen in this part two, where they're in the caves and stuff, and there's lots of writing on the wall, and it's like hieroglyphics, and like looks like you know, just like ancient stories, and it's just like all this stuff is you know, is what creates this. Again, creates the world. And this, you know, as a filmmaker, but as an actor, like walking on set and being in a space like this, it's just got to be totally different than like, okay, now I'm like standing in front of a green screen. We said this before, but it's just like you have these grand halls and these grand rooms and these big scale like sets that like just allow actors to just become the character that they need to be in every scene. It's pretty amazing.
Absolutely. And we talked about that in the original Blade Runner and in the second Blade Runner, and just how lived in and authentic it feels and what a difference that makes for the actors and for us too. Like, I mean, you know, it is a whole different experience when you can interpret a tactile quality through a visual image. It just changes it for me. And we've said this so many damn times. We're both practical lovers.
Yeah.
We love the feeling and the look of lived in dirty stuff. And, you get that here, even though you also get grandiose use of technology and CGI, like the ships and stuff like that in space. And you know, obviously you can only do that one way. I mean, you could use miniatures as it's been done in the past, but I think it is used appropriately, and each bit of sort of filmmaking technique is used when it should be. And just again, tip of the cap to Villeneuve.
I was watching a little documentary about sort of the production design in this film, Part II, and well, just both of them, I guess. And they were talking about the production designers' like inspiration. And Austin Butler kind of asked him, he was like, you know, like, what was your inspiration for this, for a certain scene? And he said, like, you know, he would tell him that, you know, I got inspiration for this scene from like a spider's web. And then I got inspiration for this other scene from like a 60s watch and like how it was designed. And it's like, what? Like, that's where he's kind of pulling all these ideas from. The production designer, I forget it. His name escapes me, but like, it's just like, you know, like you said, like, I mean, creating these worlds is a tough thing to do, but it really goes to show. There's another great moment in that documentary where, you know, it's the scene where the Fremen, Javier Bardem brings Paul Atreides' mother to the where they pour the water, the kind of the souls or whatever. Right.
There's the passing of the torch from their existing Reverend Mother to her. Right. Is that
no?
The scene with the giant, like 38 million deciliters of water. Right. Yes.
Like, we don't touch this water.
Right.
And he goes, there's just this shot in the documentary where they're sort of talking about it. And, you know, he's saying like how important it is as an actor to, like, you know, be in these spaces, and it helps you like really become the character and really absorb the fiction and kind of be in it. And then it shows this kind of shot, and they're doing a setup, and he's just sort of like going to the wall, just like touching it. Like, he's just like in his like whatever is, he's like, what? Like, you know, he's blown away by it. And it's like, and if he's blown away by it, that's just makes for such a important part of the filmmaking process.
Absolutely. Which is one last thing on the production design. I can't remember where I read this, but so there's a line you hear it briefly in the movie, and it's touched on a lot in the books. It's fear is the mind killer. You hear, I think Paul says it when he sticks his hand into the box when he's being tested by the Reverend Mother. Jessica says it when she's consuming the water of life. And so it's this a refrain of sorts, an affirmation.
Yeah.
To sort of keep yourself centered when you're experiencing fear or pain.
Right.
And one thing Villeneuve said to his design crew was the internet is the mind killer. He didn't want them looking around for visual inspiration on the internet. So things like you're talking about, a spider's web, a 60s watch, go to the library, look at art. That's where we're going to get it. We're not going to go on the goddamn internet. Internet is the mind killer.
Wow.
And boy, I couldn't agree more. And I think, to go analog, I guess, for lack of a better term, on that kind of stuff, to take it back, really cool and a really great idea.
That's super cool. So we've been talking a lot about the, you know, sort of like them as a collective, Part 1 and Part 2.
Yeah.
And I think this is where we can kind of like clue up this episode in talking about what Part 1 like is Does it work as itself, or is it part of this whole? Is the story continuing? Like, how are we to interpret this? Because I mean, even we're doing it here. We do a movie a week, yet we're doing this 2 movies sort of as one. But they are 2 separate films, and it's hard to digest.
It is tough, and much in the way that you could debate how part 1 should have ended and where they should have made that sort of fault line between in the book to break it into 2 movies. So too did we kind of debate about how we should divide and structure this conversation. Right. Should we do it talking about part 1 and then talking about part 2, and is that possible? And so these movies were titled Dune Part I and Dune Part II, not Dune 1 and Dune 2. And that might seem a pointless differentiation, but I don't think it is. This is one book, and when you watch this first movie, though there are, I'd say, a definable 3 acts, it definitely feels incomplete. Not incomplete in the same way that the Star Wars saga is incomplete at the end of Empire Strikes Back, for example, because the ending of Empire does feel more like a logical break in an epic. This is the logical endpoint for the first movie, I agree, but it's not as tidy as Empire or as Fellowship of the Ring. I can look at those as individual movies and that are part of a continuum, but for me, Dune Part 1 is half of a movie, and that is the way I see it.
Yeah, I don't know. I sort of watch it, and obviously I want more, and it's sort of you're left in this sort of limbo, and obviously it makes sense where the story can go. I think you're right, but I also think that you can enjoy these movies kind of as they are. I think what's cool about it is like you can watch part 2 and you sort of, I guess is the question, like, can you watch these separate from each other? I think
you might have to because of how long they are, unless you're, a total degenerate like we are.
Yeah, that's true. They work so well. They're sort of speaking the same language, and there's these sort of like, you mentioned Star Wars, and there's this kind of difference in like, not even just the technology, but it's like they do feel different film, like very starchly different films.
Yeah.
Versus like this, where it is really a continuation. You can press stop at the first one and press start, and it's like you're starting the next film.
Oh yeah, like the actual the action of the film is a immediate pickup.
Yeah. And what I find interesting about that is like I'm pretty sure I didn't come across this, but I'm pretty sure when it was like, we're going to do Dune 2 when he started Dune, it's like, we're going to do the second one unless it bombs. I'm pretty sure it was like, if the first one doesn't do well, we're not going to do the second one.
Damn.
I'm fairly certain that's, and I mean, even if I didn't know that would make more sense. It's not like they're going to invest another 200 million, 400 million. Like really, the budget was 175 for the first one.
Yeah, approximately 160-ish, whatever. Yeah,
double that for marketing.
Yep.
And all that. So that's, you're getting over 300 million. And it didn't, what did it make? 400 or something?
Yeah, it was in the 400 range. So not like a runaway success.
Yeah, but enough that they're like, okay, we can kind of build this and
especially allowing for COVID and things like that.
Exactly.
And I think the nature of it being incomplete maybe did affect it a little bit in terms of audience, participation.
But that's what I found interesting about the first one versus the second one is like, you mentioned it in the rundown, like critically and from a fan perspective, like the second one seemed to be more like critically acclaimed and like more like it got bigger at the box office. Yes. More money.
Yep.
Like more people seem to love it, but that's because I think I got used to the first one, or we had time to digest the first one. Right, when you first see it, it's a lot to take in.
Sure, yeah.
It's a lot to understand. You're like, wait, who? There's Harkonnens and Atreides, and wait, who's the Freeman, the Fremen, like there's all these sort of this new. I used it before, like we're talking the same language now in the second one. You didn't get that in the first one. You had to be, especially if you didn't read the books, you got to be caught up to speed. You're like, I don't know who any of these people are.
Yeah.
And what, you're going to kill Oscar Isaac in the first like 20 minutes? Like,
That's
what
the
is
Ned
that?
Stark thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You know, and then you start speaking the same language in the second one. So you're like, oh, okay, I know who these people are. And then you get introduced to these even people that you sort of were introduced to in the first one, like the Emperor, right? He's referenced a lot in the first, but we don't see him.
And then it turns out to be Christopher Walken.
But Christopher Walken,
My little wide-eyed doe.
No, I don't know about being this Emperor.
The spice must flow.
Bend the knee.
Great choice.
Yeah. We'll talk about the casting in the next one.
Sure.
But yeah, the Christopher Walken, the Emperor. But yeah, like I said, like we understand what is happening now, in a movie that kind of is, forces you to be a bit smart.
Sure. Yeah. It doesn't hold your hand either. It doesn't hold your hand. And I think, there is an argument to be made too that the success of the second one is based around, in part, that it contains the more interesting material. It's the second half of one book, which is where if you are writing a book or making a movie, there should be a ramping up of excitement. It should build. If you're the best part of your book is the first half, no one's going to read the next one because they're going to remember the second half and the letdown that it was. So it's almost as if the first movie was at a disadvantage right off the hop because the better material is in the second half of the book.
Okay.
And so that's,
Well, does that mean that the better part of this podcast is going to happen next week?
Oh, damn.
That's funny because that's such a good moment to turn it to jump into our second half of this conversation.
Absolutely. We're in the desert. We're with the Fremen.
Yeah.
We are ready to go into the deep
their,
sandworm territory. And, it's exciting.
Learn the ways of the Fremen. Yeah,
right.
we have a lot more to talk about with this film.
Yes.
These films. And
see, you just proved my point. It's one movie. I told you.
It's one movie. We're an hour in, and we were like, okay, first episode might be a half hour, second one will be a half an hour, whatever. And we're an hour in, and we've just scratched the surface. But we're gonna get more into the character ideas. We have some thoughts on colonialism and a lot of thoughts on the religious aspect in this film.
Oh yeah.
I want to get talking about Paul Atreides and
your boy
Timothée Chalamet and see where David stands on some stuff because I don't know. Okay, so this has been part 1 of Dune, part 1, part 2 as one movie. This is part 1. We'll see you all next week for second half of Dune.